This is Leslie Kane, and you're listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. Andy here, and I am taking a well-earned break over this Christmas, festive, New Year period, but in that time, to keep the content coming, I've dipped right back into the archives, and I mean the very early shows of That UFO Podcast. If you've been with the podcast from the beginning, or when you joined, you dipped back and checked out those very early episodes, you'll have heard some of these clips already, but I think for many of you, these will be pretty new. I used to finish every episode, every interview with a quickfire round. That still happens sometimes, but not all the time, depending on guests' availability and timing as well, and sometimes just relevance. But in those early episodes, speaking to guests, we covered topics at the end of each interview, including Skinwalker Ranch, Roswell, famous names in ufology, CE5, disclosure, and much, much more. So this part 1 is going to be followed by a few more parts over the next week to 10 days, just to give myself a bit of a break. But rest assured, in the new year, there will be fresh interviews released which are already being recorded. When you listen to this, some of them may have actually been recorded anyway. But I think after 300 releases, I'm due a week off, so please don't grudge me it, and my wife and kids will probably thank you for it as well. I've enjoyed going back and checking out some of these clips. I think I've improved ever so slightly in terms of interviewing and the quality of the sound as well, so this sounds almost like old school radio at times, but I'd like to thank those early guests once again: Gary Voorhis, Sean Cahill, Jason Gleaves, Tim McMillan, and MJ Banias. All of them have made multiple appearances on the podcast or played a big part in the podcast over its time as well. So thank you to them. I hope you, the listener, has a wonderful festive period. Please keep listening, keep tuning in, keep sharing the show, keep getting in touch. It's been an incredible year. Thank you so much to everyone who has bothered to listen. I really do appreciate it. It is ridiculous how many of you choose to listen week in and week out. Thanks to everyone who helps with the show. Thanks to Dan for his part in the show, his analysis. Thanks for putting those YouTube videos together for me as well, and for the graphics. Thanks to all the guys at UAP Media for the work that they have done over the course of the year, especially some incredible efforts on the research front from them. And just in general, thanks to anyone who bothers to come onto the show to talk to me, or for any of you who choose to listen. But listen, enough about this. Let's get back to you who wants to check out those early quickfire rounds, kicking off with Gary Voorhis. First off, just a few words or a few sentences, what comes to mind, and if nothing does, we can move on to the next one, okay? Yeah. So the first one you kind of touched on earlier, but just to come back to it, 'cause it's really important, that the D word, disclosure. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that.
Well, what comes to mind is that, like I said, I don't ever think that it can come out. Disclosure gets too close to national security, even to the people that would love to tell you. That's the reason why I think that when these presidents are running for office and they say, you know what, I'm going to get to the bottom of this alien situation, and then they find out, and then they're just like, well, shit, I can't say that. I can't even talk about that. When they truly find out, what's going on, I got a feeling that, they just can't talk about it. And, whether it's, stability of our economy or stability of our security, as no country is going to admit that they can't provide 100% security to their country. And that starts and stops with classifying any information that is to the contrary to that.
Yeah, and I suppose we're seeing a bit of a taste in that with a virus at the minute, as it's kind of going throughout the world, that people have been stockpiling toilet paper to kind of combat this. So the way they've reacted to this probably shows you that something like that coming out, which, let's be honest, is probably the single biggest story of all time, they're not going to react well to it.
So, no, they won't react well to it. Apparently everybody thought they were going to shit themselves to death.
Yeah, that was the least of people's problems. But yeah, the toilet paper went pretty quickly. Next one I want to ask you, Lou Elizondo.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts?
I think he's legit. I think that he's been where he says he has, and he's done what he says he has done. Because he talks exactly like somebody that would be in that situation where he wants to be on the mainstream with it, but there's just stuff he can't talk about, so he has to prove it instead. He has to come back. It's like, if I want to talk about something about my system or something like that, I actually will Google whatever I want to talk about to see whether or not it's already out there. And then if it's already out there, I'll talk about it. And I have to just double check to make sure it's not classified. But luckily for me, all my stuff was from 16 plus years ago. So most of that stuff has already been sold off to other countries.
Okay.
So I'm good with talking about some of the systems, but there's some system specifications like frequencies and events and times and things like that, but not related to this incident that I still can't talk about. And that's what people don't understand. And the way he talks, it's kind of I kind of feel him when it comes to that stuff, because if he really was working hand in hand with that stuff, it's like. I had a buddy that was a spook, which is basically an intelligence guy. He great guy and everything like that. And when you asked him what he did, he'd say, "Yeah, I'm a spook." And you go, "Well, what did you do?" He goes, "Well, I do spook stuff."
Yeah.
He goes, "You know what I do?" And I go, "I know what you do." I go, "Can you tell me about it?" No. It's just So it's it's kind of that type of situation. So if he can actually come up with the actual evidence in the civilian world for what he already knows, well, then then he can move on and actually talk about it. But until he does that, I don't think he can really talk about it. And plus, if he, people that are stressing him about, wanting solid records about, his involvement with ATIP and things like that. And, here's a program that literally didn't exist until a couple years ago. I mean, it existed, but it didn't exist.
Yeah.
So they're gonna have their roster or record of who worked there. They're not gonna. I mean, it's just illogical for me to think that the government would admit that who worked on what projects and stuff like that, and start being able to throw tracers for people to actually track down these people that worked in these projects. And poor Lou, I mean, no matter what he does, whether he's telling the truth or not, he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. The only difference is he's not making crazy, outrageous claims, and maybe not like other people in that organization. But he just got kind of stuck in that crossfire there. And him and Chris Mellon, they're upstanding guys. I mean, very intelligent guys. I mean, you can see it right in their eyes when they talk to you. I mean, and I'm not talking about that corny shit that you saw on TV. When you actually talk to them, they come off as very intelligent people, very, very calculated, very, like they know more about what's going on in your room than you do.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, well, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you exactly what I know to be true to myself, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because you probably already know more than I do. You probably investigated this situation.
I can totally get where you come from. Like with a guy like Lou Elizondo, like he can talk for hours. And I watched one of his YouTube videos. Well, not one of his, but from some conference he done last year, and it's him standing at a PowerPoint for about 2.5 hours. And at the end of it, it tells you nothing, but he says quite a lot, and it keeps you interested and intrigued the whole time. And I think if Lou Elizondo had a slogan on a T-shirt, it would be "Look at the data," because all he tells you is look at the data, and he's trying to tell you as much as he can. I see what you mean, without coming out and saying, yes, these things are alien, yes, they come from here, yes, they do this. It's like, is it not? It's almost from an area, a place of frustration, that are these things not fascinating enough just with this sample of data that you can't find that intriguing enough to take on?
It's just like when I hear people say that, enough with the Nimitz encounter and stuff like that. And I go, well, that's fine if you're bored with that. But, I mean, it's still the first time in human history that the United States government in any capacity has admitted that there are unknown objects that they track on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
I mean, that in itself, I mean, if you knew nothing about the situation, that in itself is one of the most amazing pieces of information that, 20 years ago, people doing this research, if they had gotten that, they would have been like, oh my God, that would have been disclosure for them.
Yeah. If someone told you before this happened that was going to happen, it would have blown your mind. That's too much. But
The only people that aren't happy are the ones that actually want to, see and visit and travel with aliens.
Have you got any thoughts on ultra-terrestrials and that concept or theory? It's something that Tom DeLonge's talked about.
Now, is it the theory that they're coming from different dimensions?
Yeah, potentially this planet, but different dimensions, or that there's another potential older race that are on this planet. I think it's been described as a little bit like Wakanda and Black Panther, that there could be like that whole hidden civilization that's here, something like that.
I think that if their technology was advanced enough, that they definitely could hide in plain sight relatively easy from us, because they would probably have techniques to, alter memory and things like that. So, they could literally just run a whole operation here on the planet and nobody would ever know. By that, then I think that, there's a possibility of that. I've thrown around that idea. I've even thrown around the idea that, there's been ancient, there's been a whole other massively advanced civilizations on this very planet before we ever evolved.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, I'm a crazy novice in physics, but it honestly, I love physics, and one of the things that has caught my interest is a lot of the advances in quantum physics lately. And for the people that aren't familiar with quantum physics and regular physics, they're not two different physics. It's just that, and they've been around forever. Quantum physics has been around forever. During Einstein's time, they knew about it. They just didn't use it because it wasn't as handy. Mm-hmm. Basically, if you're using, regular standard stuff, I'm trying to figure out how this ball drops and goes across my yard, I'm going to use a standard model physics because it all works. But if I'm going to try to figure out every air molecule that moved off of that ball and then interacted with every quark, that reacted with every neon, every particle, every light particle, and stuff like that while that ball's moving through, and then trying to calculate, everything else like that, I'm going to use quantum physics. So it's more of quantifying the small rather than the big.
Awesome. What about the extraterrestrial? Where does that sit with you in this whole thing?
So now the ultra-terrestrial seems plausible for me because of my thoughts on how the universe started, and that when trying to look back on trying to figure out doing thought experiments on like how the universe came into being with the Big Bang, and I had heard a statement from a physicist saying that it could be possible that the Big Bang was basically the backside of a black hole. Basically they're saying that in another dimension that enough material got pulled into a black hole in that dimension that it actually burst into our dimension, causing a Big Bang of material.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the very moment that material started to move through this dimension, that it actually created the dimension itself. Now, for every possible direction that this material could have moved in, that's a different dimension that would have been created. And then on top of that, you're going to actually have, or not dimensions, but you're going to have parallel existences to this one. So not only different dimensions, but parallel existences too. Basically the ups and the downs. You get your first, second, third, all the way up to seventh dimension. I think they've mathematically proven exists, or and then,
I'll take your word on that one. Yeah.
Well, I've only read a couple of things on that right now, and then of course, there's a theory that there's multiple existences too, multiple realities. And I think that those realities come into play whenever there's a choice, whether you blinked that moment or you didn't blink that moment. Now you have two different realities. So for every micro thought, every micro inflection on your face, there was always something different you could have done, and there was an infinite amount of universes that were created at that one moment. So it's I've thought a little too far into all this, so we won't go too far into it. But from what I think, could technically be possible with physics, that there's a very, very real possibility that these could come from another dimension or even a parallel universe.
So you would say less likely to be another planet, more likely dimensional?
Due to the amount of time that it would take to move around, because, all right, say somebody did visit our planet and they were just there's a scientist, Kevin Knuth, that's in part of my the UAPX organization, and he actually summed it up really well in one of his lectures. Say I visit your planet and I leave. Once I leave, time is relative to your planet. It could be 10,000 years before I even get back to your planet, but for me, it could have only been, a dozen years.
Mm-hmm.
I come back and, evolution's taken a turn for the worst. Or, if I come here, I could have just set up camp with remote operations and then moved on to the next planet, never to come back here. But now you see the remnants of me because I left a bunch of, remote operated vehicles to track and maintain what's going on here.
I left a bunch of Tic Tacs off the California coast, buzzing about
and those
aircraft carrier groups.
Now, those are the more fantastic ideas that I've come up with, and of course, those are the ones that people want to hear. The real reality of the situation is it very well could be just our own technology that's been cartelled, our own people. Because when it comes down to it, we've seen it happen with oil, we've seen it happen with diamonds, we've seen it happen with every natural resource on this planet. Mm-hmm. It's for the people to say that it doesn't happen with technology. Well, I'm sad to say that there's a lot of tech I've seen that it still hasn't even hit the market. Nothing fantastic. Just it's like I remember when OLEDs finally hit the market. I saw that shit like 30 years prior.
Listen, so that's a great one. I've another couple of words to throw at you, then I kind of finish up. Okay. Any thoughts on Bob Lazar and his story?
I think that there's truth there that got corrupted by media.
Okay.
And not corrupted in a way that like they twisted it, but I have a feeling that the guy had a fantastic story to begin with that got just blown up to a proportion that it didn't need to be, and I think the guy kind of felt like he had to keep up with it and something new all the time. I see a guy that something fantastic happened to, that it just got turned and twisted and changed into an animal that he couldn't control anymore. And I think that's really why he kind of went off the grid for so long, because he just couldn't control the narrative anymore. He couldn't control the story. It was just had a mind of its own after a certain point.
Totally fair. And I want to ask you to kind of summarize a little bit, where do you see things as related to this topic in the next 5 years?
I see all of us still craving for more knowledge.
Unfortunately,
and all of us waiting for the next Tic Tac incident.
Do you see anything else coming out, like, not that, as you say, the Princeton Nimitz, not that it's amazing, but do you think we'll get more released that have happened more recently? Because a lot's came out that potentially we know there's been more incidents, but do you think it will come out?
Well, I think that it definitely will become more commonplace. I think that with the Nimitz incident, that it's now going to be a little bit more mainstream. So there's been some really good push forward for this to be a mainstream topic. And what I'm really hoping for the future is real science, real scientists, people that would have just scoffed at this years ago, hopping on that bandwagon, kind of like when Einstein was trying to say that time was relative and that, you're nuts, guy, and then all of a sudden he was proven right, and everybody jumps on that bandwagon and starts riding, doing the trip to Oregon.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that it becomes even more mainstream. I'm hoping that, colleges that instead of having this under their paranormal, the few colleges that have degrees in paranormal psychology or paranormal paranormal studies, I hope that it becomes a topic that is well researched and actually brings in some more brilliant minds like like Deep Facade and Kevin Knuth and people of that nature, where they're just absolutely brilliant people that have had this education that we can all wish that we had. I don't know what your education is, but mine is not as good as I'd love it to be. And then I've actually vowed to get my doctorate before my daughter graduates high school. So,
So Gary, that's all we've got time for. But thank you very much. Awesome. So that moves us nicely into the kind of word association. I've done this with Gary on the last episode. It was really good. So it can be a couple of words, first thing that comes to your mind, or a few sentences, or if you want to go in a bit more, you can. But I'll change it about a little bit because, like you've touched on meditation, interested in your thoughts on CE5 and Stephen Greer, obviously having recently released a documentary.
Well, CE5 in general to me is just, to me personally, it's a simplification and rebranding of what a lot of people call channeling or mediumship. And I think that if people are interested in CE5, they should also do a little bit of research into mediumship and channeling. Because if they have trepidation about it based on what it's named, they should just take it a little easy. As far as Dr. Greer goes, I acknowledge his incredible wealth of knowledge and his incredible catalog of evidence that he's brought forth to people, the Disclosure Project, etc. I'm not a fan of branding of any kind in regards to this. So my feelings also stemming from meditation are that people be careful when involving very strong emotions and expectations and things like that, because we can mislead ourselves. I'm not debunking anything. I'm not saying that any of these protocols that people represent or that they may be selling, whether they have validity or not. I'm just saying that I think people need to be their own advocates, and if they just need to be careful. Be careful of personalities leading your spiritual journey rather than your own heart.
So on the scale of the unidentified to ancient aliens, you would say that falls more towards the ancient aliens side of things?
Well, I don't have evidentiary efficacy for the claims that are being made. So I have to place it more underneath a umbrella of entertainment until I see that. Now I know that there's people that will say, well, you haven't, the data is here, the data is there, and it may be, and my investigation hasn't led me to a point where I have really tried to put any kind of weight behind CE5. I've had my own personal experience with it, and frankly, that's what leads me to tell people to be careful. I know that people will say that there's a lot of people out there that like to immediately say, well, that's all you, there's no bad guys out there. There's nothing negative to this whatsoever. And I personally cannot believe that all agendas out there have my best interest at heart, because if there's more than one, that's impossible.
Yeah.
So I'm not in the game of following agendas. I like to make my own distinctions. I intend to Lou and I intend to work together in the future. We have other projects that we're working on together. And he knows that the number one important thing to me is authenticity. I don't want any BS in this. I do like to speculate for fun, but I'll be darned if I claim to know what any of these things are. So that authenticity piece is real important to me.
Awesome. So I'll get a few more word associations if you don't mind. Tom DeLonge?
Genius.
Fan of his music as well?
It's funny. I like a lot of his music, but I had a roommate when I was in Guam for a few years who incessantly played Blink-182 when they first came out, to a point that it was the only, I think Heavy Petting Zoo was the only, I think that was the record, but it was the only one that he played. And so it took me a long time to get back to it. But yeah, I do like Tom's music. And Angels and Airwaves.
It's funny. Yeah. He's had some really good stuff. It's funny how these things come full circle. What about Christopher Mellon?
Gravitas. is the word that I think stands behind Chris Mellon. For people who don't know who Chris Mellon is, the positions he's held, and his family, etc., the idea that he has taken such a serious interest in this, especially given the assumptions of what Mr. Mellon's been briefed on, it blows me away. You know, if Chris and Lou together on TV is almost an unstoppable force. Chris Mellon is one of those people that I get a little tongue-tied when the subject of him comes up. Actually, to be honest with you, a lot of the team at TTSA gets me a little tongue-tied, and I'm not a fanboy. I've looked into their pedigrees, and these people made a lot of phone calls to each other before any of this stuff happened, and before they said, let's risk our reputations to take this forward. So, yeah, I'm blown away.
I think earlier when we talked about the weight behind the evidence, that's Chris Mellon's name jumps out at what he's done and the levels, like you say, and those assumptive briefings you talked about, the things this man's been privy to and must know, and is incredible. Bob Lazar.
You know, as I don't have any personal views on Bob, but I feel that Bob always has seemed to have a little bit of an aura around him that makes me nervous because of the way he was treated when he first appeared. Now, given the time that's since when Bob first spoke up and we first learned of him years ago to now, we've also learned that to an extent that there's been a certain acknowledgement of disinformation that occurred. There's been a certain acknowledgement that certain secrets were being kept. So we know that those secrets existed now. So we have to take the things that were said about Bob Lazar with a grain of salt. And we also have to give credence to the fact that Bob's back. And Bob's got a lot of the same names are standing right behind him. And if they're not right behind him and in the credits, they're off to the side, giving the thumbs up and saying, yeah, do this thing. So that says a lot. Now, whether Bob has the whole truth and nothing but the truth, again, I haven't seen anybody who's holding on to the whole truth yet, and I don't know it either. But my instincts tell me we've got a lot of people holding a lot of different pieces of it.
Okay. A phrase that has changed in definition a lot, even in recent weeks rather than recent decades, but extraterrestrial.
I think that we need to loosen up on a lot of our definitions. Extraterrestrial, extra more, terrestrial Earth. I think, in even the word alien, etc. Whatever this is, I don't think it's your neighbor. I don't think he's going down to the top secret facility in the morning and zipping off in his spaceships and doing these things. So whatever fits, extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, alien, it doesn't bother me, but I think we need to be ready to pivot once we actually find one that we can agree is one. Hopefully alive.
Again, consciousness?
Fundamental. The only thing that all of us can know is that our consciousness exists. I'm taking it on. The only thing I take on faith is that you're real too, because I can't prove it. So our consciousness and how we curate our own personal consciousness, what we allow into it, how we express it, and our interior state, I think are the most important things in our lives, period.
Awesome. And two more, if you don't mind. So I'm going to say Mars, and I mean the planet, not the chocolate bar, but is there anything to that?
I think it's definitely worthy of further study, but if we're talking about in regards to this phenomenon, there are anomalies that need to be looked at. And again, there are lines from those anomalies that we can see that can be drawn to some of the intelligence data gathered casually by the same remote viewers that were being utilized by the government to do real life intelligence work that people's lives depended on. So it's an easy thing to throw water on, but this, again, the same folks that were finding the downed aircraft we're finding a previous human history piece to Mars. I can't say whether it was real or not, but again, we all have to consider that if you're able to find a jet that's crashed, and then you're saying there's something really interesting on another body in the solar system, perhaps it deserves a bit better look.
Absolutely. And I wanted to say earlier, remote viewing is a topic that fascinates me. And again, I'd love to speak to you again more in future, but that's something I'd love to have someone on who has had experiences of remote viewing like that in one of the early episodes. And the last one, because for me this is a really under-discussed topic and something I would love to see come to prominence and times coming up, but the Phoenix Lights incident, famously from 1994. Have you got any thoughts on that?
You know, it's there. A lot of people have very strong beliefs and emotions around the Phoenix Lights, so it's become one of the incidents that unfortunately I haven't formed a very solid opinion on. I've talked to some people who I consider to be very very worthy of providing an opinion for me in the interim, and they believe that it was something unusual. That it wasn't military flares or simple aircraft in line or birds or anything like that. But I don't have that. I don't have the personal level of knowledge on the incident that I could say one way or the other.
So, bit of a word association for you. Some of the things you've mentioned within the conversation, again, to summarise, or just your thoughts. And if you have no thoughts on them, we can move on. So, your first one is the term UFO.
It's slightly undermined what it actually means. People nowadays, when you hear that phrase, those three letters UFO, it's wrongly thought of. People automatically assume that it's extraterrestrial in origin or nature, and it's not. UFO is what it actually means: unidentified flying object. You know, until you identify what that object is, it is always going to be unidentified, but it's not always extraterrestrial.
Absolutely. And following on from that slightly, I don't know if you've seen in the last week the Magi UFO hashtag that's been trending with the incident that's happened potentially in Brazil.
Yeah, I'm still researching into that one. Again, there's not an awful lot of information out there. Until I've actually got more information on it, I would probably not comment much on it, because whether you can actually believe it or not believe it, I like to get more facts before I actually say more on that one.
Absolutely. Just as a bit of a heads up, one of the guys on Twitter, I don't know if you follow Arthur Iglesias, he's a Brazilian native who lives in Liverpool, like yourself, where you're from, funnily enough. He's been doing a lot of retweets of the videos and really, really kindly has been doing some translating of the language and just what's being said. So if you're doing some research on that, that's something I looked into quite a lot, and he might be worth kind of following on Twitter and getting in touch. I done a bit of a 10-minute roundup show last night on it. Again, there isn't really enough to go with what has happened. It looks like something has definitely gone on, but what is very, very difficult to pinpoint with kind of what's out there. Nick Pope.
Yeah, well, Nick actually came out the day after the sighting at RAF Cosford, and I know Nick quite well. Spoken to him on numerous occasions, and he's kindly wrote a nice piece in the first book, UFO Photo, on the aftermath of what he went through the March 1993 RAF Cosford incident.
Nick's a fascinating character for anyone in the US. He's pretty well known overseas now with his appearances on a lot of TV shows. Nick's someone I'd love to speak to on the show down the line. I attended a lecture in Berwick of his in 2014 that he put together, I believe a bit last minute. He was coming over to visit, and it was really well attended, and you could listen to him talk all night. He's fascinating in what he says. What's your thoughts on Project Blue Book? That's something that's discussed, especially in Book 2.
Yeah, that's Hynek, isn't it? Going through, he obviously had the different projects at the time. Dr. Alan Hynek, the astronomer, and he again, Project Blue Book was the last of 3 books. Obviously, the first book was Project Sign, which was 1947. Then 1949, you had Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book was really Dr. Hynek was brought into play to debunk UFOs on behalf of the US government, and he actually did a turncoat and actually believed in what he was actually researching and analysing, and he went on obviously to write books, and even had a cameo role in the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the Steven Spielberg movie. So, and again, there's the new TV show, which I quite like. Things are different to what are in the book and stuff, but it is TV drama. But I think it was done really well. I advise anyone to watch that, and it goes into really how he got into Project Blue Book.
And I will second that. I thought the TV series was excellent. It was very X-Files in nature, but with, as you say, it's got the Hollywood touch, but the storylines were good, and to bring in so many real cases and have that woven throughout, I think was what was needed for that type of audience. Unfortunately, the History Channel in the US haven't greenlit a second series because they are moving in a different direction, and it's currently on hiatus as it looks for a new home. So there is a petition online if anyone wants to go and get that signed to get it moved. But in the UK, it was on Sci-Fi, and I thought it was fantastic as well. And the last one I'd like to get your thoughts on is a sighting from 1997, I believe, if I get the year correct. And I wonder if you've done any research on it, but it's one of my favourite topics in ufology, is the Phoenix Lights incident.
Yeah, I actually had a look at the images. There was somebody else, I can't, for the top of my head, I can't actually remember his name, but he actually had a sighting at the time as well of a similar V-shaped craft. I mean, this one at Phoenix Lights was a huge craft, and people could just see the lights in a V-shape that appeared. And I think there was 20,000 people saw this, actual view of this object over the nighttime sky. It was tried to be debunked, saying it was aircraft flares and all the usual types of things. But another good thing in relation to that case, recently on the One show here in the UK, Kurt Russell was a guest on the show.
I think, saw this, yeah.
Yeah, it was the time he was his new film, wasn't it? Guardians of the Galaxy.
I believe so, yeah.
And he was sat there, and they brought up, I think it was sort of planned in a way, the more I read into it. Anyway, he was sat there, the one of the presenters next to him actually went on about the Phoenix Lights. He brought it up in the conversation. And long story short, there was a civilian pilot that actually witnessed the Phoenix Lights as he was coming into land at the airport there, the local airport. Obviously a different view to the people on the ground saw. He just saw the lights on a horizontal rather than looking up at them from the ground. Anyway, as it was being mentioned on the show, he said, he sort of perked up in the conversation and said, "Yeah, I was that pilot who saw the Phoenix Lights." And he, long story short, again, he said he was sat home with his wife as a Goldie Hawn, and they were watching the UFO show. And he said he'd completely forgotten about it, and it came up in the conversation with Goldie when they were talking about UFOs, etc. And she said to him, "Weren't you taking one of our children to, wherever it was, fly them into the airport, at the time?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "We saw it. We landed, refueled, and then came home." So, a bit of synchronicity there, the way it all linked up and everything. But yeah, with the Phoenix Lights, it sort of gave another backbone to the story, if you know what I mean, another step up.
And you said yourself, there's no such thing as a coincidence. So if that's another potential drip feeding back into mainstream media, we're all for that.
That's it, yeah.
It's a lovely summary. And what I'll do, Tim, just before we wrap up, is just run through some quick fire. I've got a few people, a few events, and just a phrase or two. And I just want either a couple of words, or if you want to elaborate on it, you can. Some things you've touched on already. So the first one would be Bob Bigelow.
Okay, so if I around. Rebelliously curious entrepreneur. That I'd love to know why he says beyond any reasonable doubt that he doesn't give a damn what anybody says. Aliens are here, and so I don't know. I'd love to know that, but I'll give him credit. Like I said, he's been willing to invest his time, energy, effort, and money into it. So rebelliously curious would be my fire round answer.
Okay. The next one's on a recent event that I'm sure you've seen at least a little bit about, is the MAGE UFO incident in Brazil.
Yeah, I've only just seen a little bit. I think from what I've heard is it was more hoax than real. That's just at least what I've heard. Is it still debated?
There was something else that's happened. It seems to be honest now, around about 12 to 15 days worth of incidents have now gone on.
Oh, wow.
With lights in the sky in different parts of Brazil. And again, I point out to Arthur Iglesias on Twitter, who's a UK native, but he's a Brazilian native living in Liverpool in the UK, who's done some great translations on a lot of the civilian videos. And there is genuine panic in these people's voices. They are definitely seeing something up in the sky. There are different light patterns appearing, similar to some of the things you said you saw on your sighting with the three lights blinking on and off. So there seems to be something to it. Where we kind of struggle is there's a real lack of tangible evidence. There are videos of kind of smoke coming from the mountains. There's a few fake videos thrown in there of older drone shows and whatnot that are absolutely nothing to do with the incident. If I had to summarise, and I've done a very quick bonus episode of it, I called it 2.5, something's happened. What, it's really unclear, and people have seen something, but yeah, there's a lot of military activity happenstance that goes on around an industrial military complex, but a lot of people coming up with that the place does make ammunition and never has the level of activity that it has seen recently. So yeah, it seems that there's maybe something worth digging into, but it could absolutely very quickly lead to nothing.
I'd be fascinated by it, because that's one of the things that I think gets lumped in too much, is that the UFOs become either an American or a Western kind of phenomena. And just the other day I was saying, in a perfect world, and maybe someday sooner rather than later I will, is I'd like to go to Africa and start asking people, you see anything weird in the sky? There's like these disconnected regions, either because of language, culture, or whatever, that we just have zero data out of. But they also are not corrupted by all the other, I'm not going to go to Zimbabwe and they go, yeah, we saw it, and, that's the Roswell crash, because they don't know about that. So yeah. I would love to hear from some of these areas. And South America is a very intriguing spot to me in general. Another one on the list, in a perfect world, I want to go down there.
Definite hotbed just now. There's some activity going on, but it's definitely worth looking into. My next one would be extraterrestrial. What does that mean to you?
Extraterrestrial, in context of the UFO thing, I think I summarize it basically as anything that's not human being. And so you kind of heard me say earlier that I'm not totally adverse to this idea, this interdimensional theory that you hear people say. In addition to alien distant world theory, there's and this is the part where it gets deep in the weeds, is you just brought up a great point here, is there is some serious scientific and even philosophical questions that even exist there in terms of being able to travel from a different distant star system and reality. Because of time dilation, if you were able to travel all the way to another distant galaxy, when you're looking back from that point, because time and space is dependent, what if when you're looking back, like you're technically looking back X number, thousands or millions of years in Earth's future, Earth has wiped itself out and there's no human beings. And so it's like, well, if there's no human beings, or you've gone the other side and human beings don't exist, do you exist type thing? And so that's why I wonder that it seems almost too simplistic to believe it's some aliens who hop in a ship and, just happen to travel fast from their planet. And so extraterrestrial would be anything that's not us. Where destination unknown.
I agree that it's too simplistic to say it's aliens hopping on a spaceship from Mars and coming down. Something I really wanted to talk about today, but just in doing the research for the show, I found there was so much I could have spoke to you about, and it's definitely something I'd love to come back to on. But Bob Lazar.
I do not believe Bob Lazar. I don't. There's a considerable amount of information that has either been made public or I haven't had a time to make public, because I'll tell people I try to really focus on things that I think are tangible, real, and could provide realistic results, and I don't see anything there. But yeah, no, I mean, I going back to people that was in his purview and in his space in the 1980s up to when he supposedly said and all this stuff, who have told me, yeah, no, he's full of shit. And so I am totally open and willing to there being a new evidence presented that says I'm wrong, and I'll be the first to say I'm wrong. But based on the preponderance of evidence that have gathered and I'm aware of, I don't believe Bob Lazar's story at all. So it's a good story. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. And the last one that we've touched on, for you, what is disclosure?
I think disclosure, and it does it more surround. I think disclosure for me would be just what we talked about earlier. It would be that kind of acknowledgement and supported by supporting evidence showing that there is indeed something that is undefined, unknown. It is not human technology. It is not foreign technology. It's not our technology being disclosed to the point where my version of disclosure is when enough information comes out that somebody like Mick West goes, well, holy shit, okay, that's interesting, guys. Let's try to tackle this problem now instead of debunking it. And so, to me, that is disclosure. It's not. I just simply have never seen any evidence that disclosure is going to be wheeling the bodies out from Roswell or something. I don't. Maybe they do have them. That would be interesting. That'd be super cool. But I don't know that that's real. But who knows? Hey.
But then, would it be met still with that shrug that Matthew Hirsch mentioned?
I don't know. That would be. I mean, you think if the president or somebody on TV wheeled out the bodies, and you got a tour of the secret underground facilities. If that was true, I don't know that one. I would hope if that was met with a shrug, then I'm just gonna, I'm gonna go ahead and go outside and welcome the apocalypse, because
give up.
Yeah, I mean that would, I think, very rightly so, and that's why I try to be very serious about this topic, is because at its heart, what we're talking about could be the most significant. It is the most significant thing next to the development of language in human beings, and so it should be treated seriously. I mean, why shouldn't it be? Both scrutiny and open-mindedness. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that. I agree with Dr. Hirsch. I really, he gave such great comments and everything. And our conversation there was explicitly just kind of focused in on the idea that the government did encounter some technology and it didn't understand it, so they hid it from people. And so, in actuality, to some extent, I think if they came out and that was true and they rolled out the Roswell wreckage, I think he's right in that a lot of people would be like, well, duh, we've known that, thanks for telling us. Yeah, I don't know. It would, sadly, I think what you'd see is not enough focus on that in and of itself. You would see mainstream news being like, see, the current presidential administration or the past president, they're all pieces of shit and they've been lying and I want to impeach or I want to charge them with a crime. Unfortunately, just based on what we see recently, politics would jump in and everybody would want to blame whatever partisan party they liked or didn't like. And meanwhile, there'd be some people like us who'd be going, well, wait, can we ask you a little more about those alien things? Can we talk about that for a minute?
The body beside you, just on that, yeah.
Right. Can we talk about that a little bit? Yeah. And so I don't know. Maybe that's what people need to an extent. Maybe that would end some of the partisan BS. Maybe if we got knocked off our high horse a little bit and didn't think that we were all in charge and we collectively had a new mystery, that maybe that would change things. Maybe, who knows?
The famous Ronald Reagan quote to the United Nations about an extraterrestrial threat from outside our world and how it would unite everyone and petty differences. And do you know what? In a couple of days' time, there's a SpaceX launch with 2 astronauts going on the new rocket up to the space station as well. And it's little things like that give you a little bit of hope for things going forward. And, it's again, one small step for man, but, we'll see what comes of it this time.
We're in a good time, and I'll say that, is it whether people realize it or not, is with the development and advances in artificial intelligence, and that being a big push, or the Space Force, or NASA's pledge to go to Mars. I think we're re-entering that time frame we saw back in maybe the 50s and everything, where now human exploration is being encouraged again. In the United States, you have Common Core math, which is being put to the schools. People complain about it and everything, but they don't realize the basis behind that. And that's training kids to be good at computer math. It's math modeling and modular arithmetic. And so we're kind of refocusing where we can get a glimpse into where future's going, and it's going into the unknown. And these, I talk to people who work at, places like Lockheed or whatever, and the things that they're examining sound crazy sci-fi, but no, I think there is more of a push for that. So it's a good time for that. Maybe it's a good time for them to roll out the bodies, I don't know. Because that, again, I think you do that once people know, and I can say this because you're Scottish, but that was my good buddy Nick Cook, very good friend of mine, author of Hunt for Zero Point, former defense editor of Jans. We talk all the time. He's English, and he said, I think that at least for Americans, they'd end up developing it. He said, because Americans seem to be like, screw it, let's build some stuff. He's like, we here in England seem to be like, we're kind of lazy, let's not do it. I don't know whether that's true or not, and I don't want to make that assertion. I love England. But I think that I believe that if rolling anything out and saying, hey, there is something super advanced here, I think it would encourage a lot of people. I think the kids that are in school would even go, this is cool. Our next generation, the people who are going to figure out how to actually build those, they're probably in high school right now or in middle school. And so I would only see a positive effect if it was, real, if it was made real.
Yeah. Can only hope it can inspire that next generation, and things that have just been imagination previously just become from science fiction to science fact, doesn't it? Like,
sure. Don't we all want to? I mean, a part of me would think, it'd be cool as shit to get a lightsaber and want it to sail around the Galactic Federation, and I'm fighting the Darth Vader. I mean, that would be cool. But we gotta crawl before we can walk type thing. But it would be very cool. I hope this again goes straight in opinion and esoteric, but it's one of these things that I hope that no matter what, at some point we all get the answer, and even like the late great Stanton Friedman, I truly hope he has all the answers now, and I hope that it's one of these things that whether it's in this lifetime or whatever comes next, I hope that we kind of do figure it out, and maybe we figure out that just things are a lot weirder than we. Aliens would be so easy, but things are just weird. Life's weird. That's okay, though.
Before you finish up, we'll move on to the quick fire. So I've got a few names, incidents, topics. You can say as little or as much as you want, and that's the kind of show finishing up, okay? So you've been great to listen to, MJ, as well, so thank you very much. I'm sure people are going to love it. So the first one, you also wrote an article on this, would be the recent MAGE UFO incident in Brazil.
It was most likely just a prosaic series of drones and skydivers with pyrotechnics. I'm going to go with nothing interesting happened.
Fair enough. Linda Moulton Howe, again, someone you wrote about in one of your articles about selling the piece of potential wedged UFO for $35,000 to TTSA. So Linda Moulton Howe.
Linda's a wonderful, kind person, but I really struggle with some of the information she presents. I think as a journalist, I think she gives credence maybe to ideas that aren't necessarily legitimate, and I'm not sure why. So that's all I can say about that.
That's cool. Tom DeLong.
Man. Interesting guy. I'd love to sit down and have a beer with him. Again,
me too.
Not too sure where his head at is all the time, but I give him all the props in the world for finding guys like Luis Elizondo and Chris Mellon and assembling that. So for all the people that sort of hate on him, I would sort of say they should be able to do better. But again, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says or believes in. But that's okay. I don't have to agree with you.
No, it could be right. It could be wrong. Yeah. So the next one is All the Strange and the recent virtual expo.
Oh, that was fun. I will be totally honest. I watched Micah Hanks's and I watched mine, and then I had to be a dad, so I was unable to kind of finish it. I know Jason's slowly releasing them online, so I'm going to kind of consume them all. But I was only able to kind of be free for the morning, and then my 2-year-old and my 4-year-old were suddenly like crawling on me, so I had to go deal with them. So yeah, it was a fun time. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a cool idea.
It was, and I just wanted to get that in there because I had some issues logging in on the morning, and then with it being UK time and whatnot, like yourself, I'm kind of going back and watching them as they come out. So yeah, MJ's is awesome. Definitely recommend watching that, and then make sure you go in, and maybe that's the future of expos. It'd be great to get together again one day, but we can't do that kind of thing. This was definitely something new, and it was a good. I like that someone's tried a new type of medium for an expo, and I think it was a really good, cool idea. 3 more things, MJ. Tic Tac or UFO UAP. So the Tic Tac UFO UAP.
Well, I mean, I feel the Nimitz case is really compelling for a UFO case. I think that here, like everything ufological, right? The Tic Tac has kind of taken on its own mythology. So it's like Roswell, right? Something happened at Roswell. Unfortunately, everything we have information on in regards to Roswell is like mythological now, and we just can't figure out what it actually was, which is why I don't study Roswell. But I think the Tic Tac is kind of that. It's this curious. We're watching mythology occur in real time here. We're watching this kind of lore and legend build around this curious little incident. So I think the Tic Tac UFO concept, I think it's compelling. I think the incidents around it are compelling. I think that we're also going to see, though, this mythological framework built around it to include a whole host of weird explanations that will sometimes make sense and often not make sense. So, yeah, mythology and reality merging right now as we speak.
I like that. And the last one, and this is very much what this means to you. I like to ask all the guests this to finish off. Disclosure.
God. Yeah, just my favorite word in the UFO lexicon. Yeah, what are we disclosing? Can I caveat the question with what exactly is being disclosed? Or is it just no, I'd have to just answer. Okay. Disclosure that, as I said before, disclosure that strange things make incursions into American airspace and land or sea area. Like I'll restate. we're finally having more, let's say, transparency that objects make incursions into territory that is the United States of America and potentially other countries as well. What we don't have, and I don't think what we are going to have, is disclosure that, you know, the United States government has been colluding with aliens or interdimensional beings or time traveling humans. I don't think we're going to get that anytime ever. So when we talk about the disclosure movement or the disclosure community or whatever, I want to burst the bubble of people that think that, you know, yep, the United States has a handshake arrangement with the aliens and they're visiting us and they're walking among us and they're abducting us in exchange for technology and reverse engineered ships and all that stuff, or that there's flying saucers in a bunker somewhere that weren't made here. I'm going to say that is not true, and that's just part of the UFO mythos. But disclosure that the United States has an active research program into unidentified aerial phenomena, disclosure that, you know, they don't know what's going on in the skies all the time, definitely the case.
Awesome. But MJ, it's been great talking to you. You can follow MJ on Twitter at MJ Banias. Please go back and read his articles.
That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass. Meditative gamma state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I helped out my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what it is because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jay? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life,